When Boris Johnson first decided to stand as Mayor of London a few years back, there were some doubts as to whether he was temperamentally suited to running a big city, dealing with the bureaucracy and the nuances of transport policy and planning and everything like that. Well, now he says things are going broadly well, and he has decided to seek a second term, and he's with me this morning. Good morning, Boris Johnson.
Good morning.
You have expressed some concerns about government immigration policy. Talking about what's important to London, this question of non-EU migrants, people of high skills and so on. In the past, London's been an almost open city for them, hasn't it?
Well, I mean, you don't exaggerate, but what certainly took place in the last 12 years or how long the Labour government was in was that they totally took the brakes off. They decided to let huge numbers of people, more or less as a matter of policy and as an economic doctrine.
I'm talking about the people at the top.
And that had a big effect also at the top. And historically, you're absolutely right. I mean, London's been a great entrepot city from the very beginning, founded by a bunch of pushy Italian immigrants in 43 AD. It's always been that way. And to a great extent, the London economy does depend on talent. I mean, I think on talent being able to migrate in from overseas.
So are you concerned
the problem
now?
has been that there's a sort of confusion between the big, Labour decision to relax completely and to have no real grip on the thing, which has, I'm afraid, produced a huge political backlash against immigration overall, and people have been very, understandably very concerned about erosion of their housing rights as they see it, people taking business, all the problems that immigration produces. And the reaction has been by the coalition government to introduce the cap, and it's perfectly reasonable to try to get a grip on it. The problem is that this means that, accountancy firms, film firms, banks, all these lawyers, all these sorts of guys actually find it very, very difficult at the moment to get in some of the people who you really need to keep the London economy going. So that's why I've written to the Home Secretary and I've said, let's have a discussion about this. Let's see what we can do to, address that particular problem, the tier 1 and the tier 2 applicants who are finding it very difficult to get in at the moment without, letting the brakes off again.
Any sign of movement on this? Do you think you'll win your case?
I hope that people will see the case and see that this is an idea that is sensitive to the problems of immigration, but also realistic about what you need in London to keep the economy moving.
And speaking of the economy moving in London, what about the danger from very, very fast cuts? Because this is a gamble, isn't it? I mean,
fast carts.
Cuts.
Cuts, right.
I'll come on to carts and bicycles later.
But cuts. Yeah.
Because this is, in the nature of it, a gamble. If you get the deficit down, you might get a stronger increase in the economy, a revival later on, but you might go into double-dip recession.
Yeah, I mean, I think patently that's something that George is obviously going to be sensitive about, and the Treasury is going to be thinking about how to make sure that they do it they're absolutely right to make cuts. And, we in the government in London have been making, very substantial cuts for the last 2 years, and you've got to cut waste. I mean, I think I'm right in saying that
this is
the overall headcount of TfL, Transport for London, 22,000, we're in the process of taking out 8% already. I don't think there's any part of government across Whitehall that's moved so far and so fast to make those cuts. The point I'm making to government is that you've just got to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is a sensitive time for the economy. There are, you look at what's happening to house prices. Look at there are some interesting signals out there.
Are you kind of worried that we're on the edge of that?
No. But what you don't want to do is get into a position where you're sort of doctrinally locked in to doing things that might actually, tip you over the edge. I don't think George is anywhere near being in that position. I think he's done. If you look at what he's achieved in the last few months since becoming Chancellor, what the coalition have achieved, they've basically knocked on the head the idea that Britain is facing some sort of sovereign debt crisis. That's gone. We've been moved out of the Greek camp, the Italian. We're no longer in that camp. Long-term interest rates are very, very low. Now, my point is that you've got to look at that and you've got to think, in those circumstances, how fast do you cut? And above all, you've got to make sure that you protect those things that are going to deliver long-term growth, not just for London, but for the whole of the UK economy. The London economy drives jobs, and it drives growth around the UK.
We're talking about Crossrail, we're talking in your terms about modernising the London Underground, those kind of things.
Absolutely. And there are over the last few months, there have been some very, very tough conversations going on about Crossrail, about the tube, about transport budgets generally. And
you've won those battles, basically.
Well, we won't know that until October the 20th. We won't know that. We won't know until the fat lady sings. But clearly, it is something that I think matters hugely, not just to London, but to the whole of the UK. Because if people are left at bus stops in London because the bus system has been brutally cut thanks to the Treasury, then you cannot. This is the biggest private sector part of the whole UK economy. It drives jobs. The tax we export from London is vital for the rest of the UK.
What about housing and housing benefit cuts? Because that's another huge problem.
It is a problem, and there are I think more than 100,000 families in London who are potentially affected by this cap on housing benefit. And you have to think very carefully about how you administer such a change. 17,000 families could be forced to move. I think that is I think that's too hard, and it would be very difficult to force that in. I think in a precipitate way without
Well, except that has been announced. That's been announced already. That's not up for discussion. That's a decision taken.
Sure, but and there is a problem. Of course, there's a problem. You've got lots of landlords who are ripping off housing benefit. You've got to do something about it. What I'm saying is that you could have transitional measures, particularly for London, where the cost of housing is so much higher, and you have particular difficulties.
Can you win that argument with the Treasury?
For some families.
You're being very diplomatic about George Osborne,
of course,
but nonetheless, you are clearly concerned about the dangers of things turning down and cuts being made too fast.
There is a risk always that when you're making savings, when you're making cuts, you will do so in such a way as to do long-term damage to the ability of the economy to compete. And I've got people say to me, "What's your priority?" My priority is very, very clear. My priority is to get the best possible deal for London, not just because I happen to be mayor of London, because actually I think it's the right thing for the economy.
And it was said, possibly wrongly, that when it came to things like Crossrail and those absolutely crucial projects, you have to stand up in front of Londoners when you want to be re-elected and say, "Look, I got this through. I did what I promised to do." If those went down, Boris would go down.
Well, that would be, frankly, that would be obviously be politically tragic for me. But so what? The worst thing would be that it would be the wrong thing to do for London. I mean, and for the future competitiveness of this country. Crossrail, people, most of your viewers won't have a clue what Crossrail is, alas. It is going to be a wonderful new railway running east-west, which will greatly speed up transit from Heathrow through to the city and beyond. And if you're going to put in high-speed rail, which we're going to do in this country, you need a Crossrail in London to cope with the influx of passengers.
You heard Bob Crow perhaps earlier on.
I did hear Bob,
in Full Flood. And making the point that the origins of the crisis started in the banking sector and people behaving extremely badly there. What's your message to the bankers?
I mean, just on what Bob Crow had to say, I didn't agree with his analysis of the tube strike last week.
Well, there's a surprise.
I didn't agree with that. I don't think that he is being common sense. I don't think that the RMT leadership is right in their view of what we're trying to do with the ticket offices. I think in very tough financial circumstances, you've got to make sensible economies. We're trying to get some staff, without any compulsory redundancies, out of the ticket offices, onto the station, onto the platforms where they can be a real... And I think this strike is politically motivated. On the bankers, I think actually he has a point. Okay? You would surprise me to say that. I think he has a point. And in the sense that I think that a couple of months down the track, there are going to be big bonus stories again.
Yes.
And those stories are going to coincide with people's feeling that the cuts are starting to bite. And I think it would be a very good thing if the financial services industry, which is vital for our city and for our country, if they were aware, if they start to think politically now about big, visible ways that these people, who, as Bob Crow rightly says, were collectively implicated in the dawn of this crisis, these people should start to think about big, visible ways they can show their commitment to the city that hosts them and that is proud to host them and benefits from them.
Don't take the benefit.
And they can think of ways to demonstrate that they want to bridge the poverty gap, that they can do things to boost literacy around London.
Because otherwise
Barclays put loads of money into bike
your bicycle.
Fine.
Great, but otherwise they'll be broken up. I mean, that's the danger for them, isn't it?
Well, you know, that's a matter for the Chancellor. But there is a political issue coming down the track which they need to be aware of.
Let me ask you about
I will mount the barricades to defend and support a strong financial services industry in London. That's my job. But those distinguished, intelligent, highly remunerated people have got to understand the political consequences of doing nothing about the huge bonuses they're about to receive.
Let me ask you about another political story coming down the tracks, which is the Andy Coulson phone hacking scandal.
I think I'm better on London.
Well, what's your own position about this? Just explain where you are on this.
For me, this is one of those things that I look back and those blue remembered hills of yesteryear. This is something that is going on in Westminster, and
your phone was probably hacked.
If you want my analysis of the whole thing, I think some very nice policeman rang me up a couple of years ago to say that was probably the case. My analysis is that an assortment of ex-Labour ministers have now miraculously discovered their principles about this matter, having had 5 years since the story first broke, whilst they were in government, to get hot under the collar about it. They now decided, simply because Andy Coulson is in government, that they're going to get in a great lather about this, which is, I think everybody else can see, is fundamentally a very old story.
Leave Andy Coulson alone. He's doing a perfectly good job, and this is old stuff as far as you're concerned.
Look, I'm not aware of any single new fact that's been brought into the public domain that has, apart from the Conservative victory, or rather the coalition's victory, the general election, that has, I think, prompted politically these Labour guys.
Are we ever going to see you back in the House of Commons?
Well, I think one step at a time. All I've said at the moment is that I'm
sniff of cordite.
Being Mayor of London is the most fantastic job. It's far better than I possibly dreamed it could be. It's an extremely difficult and challenging job, but a wonderful job, and I want to keep doing it.
Boris Johnson, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. That's all. Over to Naga for the news headlines. Goodness me, that's almost all we've got time for. Thanks to all my guests. Just before we go, Boris, one thing I didn't ask you, if it's Una King or Ken Livingstone, which do you prefer? Who do you want to go for?
I levitate above it with Buddha-like serenity and indifference. I'm as indifferent on that subject as I am on the difference between Ed and David Miliband, and that is indifference.
Thank you very much indeed, Buddha. Next week, we're on the road with the Liberal Democrats at their party conference in Liverpool. I'll be talking to Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, to Yoko Ono, and to many more. We'll have music from Katie Tunstall and much else. So do join me if you can. For now, have a very good morning.